In this video, we'll be exploring reality. We'll be exploring human consciousness through the paradigms of systems, geometry, and language. And all reality starts with the one, the unbroken whole, the integrated ecology of which we are a part that connects all things. Geometrically speaking, this is represented by the sphere. Now, the sphere is unconscious. The one, the total interconnectedness of all things is unconscious. If somebody says, "How are you doing today?" and you say, "All that is," there's no awareness of particular patterns. It is unconscious. You have to say this area, which is a distinct area from all the other areas, is this way, which is distinct from every other way. In other words, one has to carve the one into pieces. And once the one is carved into pieces, each piece gets a name. Finger, hand, arm, body, background, foreground. Every piece gets a name. And with its name comes consciousness. With its name comes a possibility field. Now, the possibility field that you and I can imagine is limited to the mathematics of language. Meaning, if we have two distinctions, left and right, we have two distinctions. All reality is, and then it's broken into two distinctions, left and right, and that's all reality is. Our awareness, our ability to think, and our possibility field is limited to two distinctions, left and right. We see a pattern of energy. The only thing that we can think within such a narrow paradigm of distinctions is it on the left side or is it on the right? Here's something. Does it go on the left or does it go on the right? When you only have two distinctions, there is only one question. And there are only two answers. Where does it go? On the left, on the right. Where is it? On the left or the right? Where is it going? To the left or to the right? Where has it been? The left or the right? What does it mean? See, that doesn't fit into left and right. What do you mean, what does it mean? Was it good or bad? See, we don't have that distinction. We just have left or right. So when the one is divided into two, we have two very simple camps. We have a very simplistic model of reality, because that's really what this is. It's not reality. Meaning, reality has nothing to do with these squares. These squares are not reality. They're a map of distinctions that are given placeholders, symbolic representation with language. They're a map of distinctions given a symbolic representation of symbolic sounds or language. And if I call this little area hand, and you call it hand, then it becomes a map to go to a portion of reality that is recognized, that where the pattern is recognized as something that we've all agreed to call hand. But if we don't all agree to call it hand, if you're Arabic and I say hand, then either the symbol is a misdirection because perhaps that sound is referenced to another location in the possibility field, or it has no meaning at all. It's just a sound. Now, as we create a word, as we create a symbol, we attach it to a pattern, a distinct pattern, or the word is meaningless. I have to call this a necklace, and I have to understand that the pattern that I'm identifying is something hanging around the neck. A lace hanging around the neck is a necklace, and a pendant is an object hanging on the necklace. And so we have neck, that's a pattern. It's the space between here and here. We have lace, that's a pattern, shoelace, necklace, a thin bit of fabric or substance. And we have a pendant, to append, to attach, pendant to pendulum, to dangle, to attach and to dangle, we have pendant. And we have an idea, we have a word called ornamentation. And we say a necklace is a type of ornamentation. And so we're recognizing, we're identifying distinct patterns of energy within the totality of all that is, and we're giving it a name. And as it has a name, it has consciousness, and thought is possible. So language determines the possibility field. Now, the first thing to understand that is we're always talking about the human possibility field. There are dimensions that you and I cannot perceive. Now let's back up a minute. So we have 5 senses. We have touch, we have sight, we have sound, we have smell, we have taste. Now what these are portals or scientific instruments to sample data, to sample energy within a particular frequency. So energy's out there on all types of different frequencies, but we can perceive, we can conjure our version of reality through a sampling of energy, through observing and measuring devices, through scientific devices that help us intersect with reality, that help us perceive reality, a version of reality on the dimensions that we are capable of perceiving. Now, there is light that is darker than the human eye can see. There is light that is lighter than the human eye can see. There are lights that are so bright, they blind the apparatus that's trying to measure them. And there are lights that are so dark that the apparatus, the observing and measuring device, cannot perceive them. Now, there's also light that is above the frequency and below the frequency of the human eye. It's all reality. It's just not our reality. Now, these are little doorways into certain frequencies that we call dimensions. It is the ear that translates certain vibrations into things we call sound. Would it be a sound, though, if there was no ear? It's questionable. Might it be light at a very low frequency? If we had an eye to see light at the frequency of sound waves, might sound be light? Or if we had ears that could hear frequencies at the vibrational frequency that the eyes see, would light, would color, be called high-frequency sound? Now, what about all the vibration in between? What about the vibration that is below what our ears can hear and above what our body can touch and doesn't register as taste? What about reality? What about energy that is below what the eye sees but above what the ear hears? Do we pretend that because we do not have the observing and measuring devices to register it, that it doesn't exist? Now, sight, sound, touch, there's a convergence around objects, and we, for all intents and purposes, tend to like to intersect these areas. You know, if I say this is a finger, I want to be able to taste the finger, listen to the sound of the finger, feel the finger, smell the finger. I can't smell anything. But generally speaking, we like to be able to engage with the density of reality that has multiple dimensions. Sight and sound, sound, and taste. Smell, sight, or smell and sound and taste. Smell and touch and taste. We like to engage with objects that are multidimensional. And our senses collaborate with this intention by saying, okay, we can, we'll taste this. We've attuned our senses to largely verify. There's not that many things that we hear but cannot see. There's not that many things that we see but cannot hear, and see but cannot touch. They're there, but there's not that many. A lot of our reality, most of the areas we show up. You know, you get into a car and you can hear it, you can smell it, you can taste parts of it, and touch it, and look at it. And so it feels very real, meaning it exists through the observing and measuring devices that we have trained on those frequencies of energy. And because there's a continuity in the pattern, it works to give it a name. That's a car. That's my car. That's a car. This is my car. My car, how is it distinct? Well, it has this, and it has this, and it sounds a bit like this. Now, they're all four-wheel vehicles, if they're a car. They're all four-wheel vehicles, and the wheels are all round, and usually they're enclosed, and they move. If the car is incapable of moving, we don't call it a car. So we have some definitions, some ideas. We have wrapped the word car with other words. We have referenced that energy pattern car with other words that help us box it in, that is a car. It moves. It's big enough to hold a human being. It has lights. It has a seat, has a steering wheel. It has four wheels. Okay, it deserves the classification of car. Now, what we're doing is we're constructing a possibility field with words. And it's important to understand that in this area over here, where the only words that exist are left and right, there's only two boxes to put all experience in. It's a sound. Is it coming from the left side or the right? But can we even talk about sound if there's only left and right? It's a very limited consciousness. Those are the only words, left and right. Maybe we have a sense of them, that this is on the right and this is on the left. And that's it. That's our version of reality. Now, if you bring in left and right and up and down, and then gradient. See, gradient is a word. It's a very important word. Means that there are degrees of right and left. It's not black and white. There's a whole terrain of gray. There's a whole terrain of gradation. Gradation, though, is a word, and it produces infinite possibilities. One word creates infinite possibilities. Because I can say this is higher up than down. It's not split down the middle. It's up and down, but it's more up than down relative to what? The center point. So it's higher up than it is down. And we have this word gradient, gradation. And what it means is that we have degrees. Now, the reason that gradation creates so much consciousness is you can have miles, and then you can have feet, then you can have inches, and you can have 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, 30/16. You can go on infinity. You can go on infinitely once you introduce the idea of gradation. Because now the grade, the point on the continuum, is limited. See, if only meters exist, then it's either this up here at the top of the meter or at the bottom of the meter, and that's about it. But if centimeters, 1/100th of a meter, exists, now, see, if there's only meters and my hand is here, then I'm going to average up, because this doesn't exist. It must be here rather than here. But if there are centimeters, and then 1,000th of a meter, a millimeter, and then 1,000th of a 1,000th of a 1,000th of a millimeter, a nanometer, a nanometer, right? It goes on infinitely. So once we have gradation, we have an infinite possibility field. And it makes reality very, very big. Because gradation as an overlay, as a paradigm to every word, hand. See, now we have the birth of a hand, the formation of a hand in the fetus, as a complete gradation that is infinite. And then we have the decay of a hand in a corpse. You know, the corpse is 1 day old, 2 day old. No, it's not 2 days old. It's 2 days, 27,000 seconds old. No, it's a quarter second, 1/8 of a second, a 1/16 of a second, right? So now we've got the formation of the hand and the decay of the hand on an infinite gradient. We've got the position of the hand in an infinite gradient. We've got the position left and right on an infinite gradient. The color of the hand is on an infinite gradient. Like we could say this is orange 302. Just made that up. If there is a color card that says orange 302, and you can go to the same place and you know which brand it is, it's Bear Orange 302, then it's a useful distinction. But where do you get 302? Well, maybe they have up to 400 and down to 200, and 302 is a gradient. But what about 302 and a half, 302 and a quarter? You see, now you have an infinite gradient of color. And what about the temperature? Is it hot or is it cold? It's warm. Well, that's 3 distinctions. It's pretty crude. But if we deal with temperature in millidegrees, we've already got infinite temperature continuums. So with the paradigm of gradient overlaid onto any word, onto any dimension, we create infinity. Infinity upon infinity upon infinity upon infinity upon infinity. Now, infinity is unconscious, so we don't use infinity. Infinity doesn't mean anything. 3 millimeters means something. 27.8 degrees means something. They are arbitrary systems. Their energy refracted through the arbitrary system of language, which, since human beings create the language, usually references the things that a human finds meaningful. Which brings us to the next question, which is meaningful for what? What do we find meaningful? Well, that which relates to sustainable well-being and chronic suffering we find meaningful. We find the continuum of suffering to well-being to peak ecstasy meaningful, because it is the ultimate guide, the ultimate drive, the ultimate reference point, the ultimate continuum for every human being. We are all motivated, put into motion by emotion, by feelings. We have a feeling that puts us into motion. Because if we have a thought, I'm going to die in 1 minute. If we have the thought, I'm going to die in a minute because a bullet or an arrow is going to be shot through the window, through here, and into the wall. And that's going to happen in 1 minute. How do we respond to that without emotion, without feelings? See, we have to have a thought that says, I want to live, which produces an emotion of, I've got to move my head in order to retain my ability to live, because my head cannot exist as a pattern of distinct energy independently of an arrow shooting through my head. So for this to exist, I've got to make room for the arrow, or stop the archer with an emotion. Give them another reason, another feeling that tells them they're going to feel better in the long run if they shoot the arrow over there, not here. So every behavior, every thought is put into motion, is responded to, is acted on with emotion, energy in motion, in response to a value hierarchy. A hierarchy means that one thing is higher than the other in our consciousness, in our mind. Higher arc. So one point is higher on the arc and lower. And within our hierarchies, we've already decided that higher is better than lower. We all know that to be feeling high is better than to be feeling low. Right? We've decided to project the good feeling on height. We think tall people are more attractive than short people based on that hierarchy, based on that supposition, which, depending on the context, makes sense. Meaning, if you're running away from harm, a tall person usually has longer legs, runs a little bit faster, outruns the others, and survives. So if you're running away, height is better. If you're looking around for harm, height is better. If the top of the power pyramid has more perks than the bottom of the power pyramid, the top is better. So within a particular context, we've already decided that to be higher is to be better, which means to feel better and not to feel worse. So when we talk about a gradation of value, we talk about it as a hierarchy rather than a lowerarchy. Because if, in fact, we had spent time in the trenches, where you never ran away, but if you stood up in the trenches, you were shot because you were standing higher, meaning you were the highest person, and most people were 4 feet tall, and the trenches were 4 feet deep, but you're 7 feet tall, so every time you stand up, you're the only target. Well, then suddenly all the tall people are killed off. And nobody wants to be tall, and nobody wants to marry a tall person because they're soon to be dead. And so, as an expression of the value continuum, such a cult, such a culture, such a group of people would create a lowerarchy rather than a hierarchy. But we've created a hierarchy in the context of a history in which height has often been advantageous. The fortress on the top of the mountain was better than the fortress in the valley. Because we survived more higher up, more often than not, we project heaven out there in the heights. Heaven is up there in the stars because that's higher. Again, in a contextual pattern in which most of our life gets better when we're lower down, meaning we get a raise when nobody can see us in the organization. So we get very good at hiding ourselves. We don't get punished when nobody can find out where we are. So we see another benefit of being lower. The lowest person, the person that nobody can figure out what their job is and who they are, or knows anything about them, they get the raise because that's the most beneficial spy in a spy organization, right? You don't want spies. You don't want to hire spies that everyone knows who they are and what they do for a living and what their daily routine is. No, you want people that nobody remembers. And so in those contexts, a lowerarchy, that which is lower, becomes correlated with sustainable well-being. And so everything gets measured within that general paradigm of how low does it take you. Well, because we're dealing with hierarchies, having had some positive connecting points with height, we talk about we're not going to sink that low. We're going to rise above, which is just words. But they're words that make sense to consciousnesses that have correlated height with well-being. Within a general paradigm in which all human beings are oriented biologically to seek sustainable well-being and avoid chronic and unnecessary suffering. All beings are oriented towards sustainable well-being. It is the primary reference point for emotion, for motion, for speech, for identity. Does this path lead us to feel better, or does it lead us to feel worse? Because whether we're correct or not in that assessment, all human beings throughout history, in every expression of human behavior, is in a roundabout way within a certain paradigm and within a certain system of thought, is pursuing sustainable well-being. If you understand that, then you understand that that's what has meaning. If you can give someone sustainable well-being that is not available to them in any other way, number one, and you can help them realize that, number two, you become the most meaningful person in their reality. But they have to see that you can provide them with a path of sustainable well-being that is unique, that is greater, unique and greater. Meaning if every person in every place offers the same sustainable well-being, it's not unique. And if it's unique but less than another path of sustainable well-being, it's not greater. Now, again, within a hierarchy, we say it's not higher levels of sustainable well-being. Because we've all agreed that when we say higher, we mean better. So we've just conflated those two words, higher and better. Better means more well-being, more sustainably. So that's what gives us meaning. If I can earn $1,000, it has meaning if I believe that my sustainable well-being will go up with $1,000, with $1 million. If I believe that my sustainable well-being will go down significantly with the $1,000, it also is of interest to me. Anything that markedly changes my degree of suffering, which correlates to my degree of well-being. It is an infinite continuum. Anything that changes that has meaning. And words are the map that we use to navigate that terrain. Meaning words are symbols for thoughts, for feelings, for actions, for sensations that help us to become conscious of whether or not within the systems we have designed, we are increasing sustainable well-being or decreasing sustainable well-being, increasing unnecessary suffering or decreasing unnecessary suffering. So this is what gives life meaning. Increasing our own well-being, increasing the well-being of those around us, decreasing our own suffering, increasing our own suffering. Both have meaning. Decreasing the suffering of others, increasing the suffering of others. Both of those have meaning. You could call the continuum well-being. You could call the continuum pain. Because there is no perfect well-being within the human experience. It doesn't exist. there are always flaws in the system of consciousness that makes perceiving reality anything but perfect. Reality is never perfect within language, because language is a system. Now, it's an important system because we cannot think outside of words. Cannot think outside of words. Just give it a try. Try and imagine any thought in the universe that you could think without referencing words as the foundation for that thought. And you realize that words and language are the same, that thoughts emerge out of the synergy of words, and that words emerge as reference points for other words. Right? If I say that I'm sitting here happily, I have to reference a whole bunch of other words in order for that to make any sense. Sitting does not make sense without the words standing and laying down. Otherwise, I just am. It's a meaningless word. Feeling good makes no sense unless there's also feeling bad and feeling better, feeling ecstatic, right? It's a meaningless word. Here makes no sense unless there are multiple other places that I could be, and each of those have a word. If I didn't have those words, then these words would make no sense. And so, in a very important way, words carve up the totality of what is into boxes that we pretend, for the purpose of facilitating human consciousness, for the purpose of convenience, that we pretend are the things they are. We pretend that this is a hand. And in order to pretend that this is a hand, we have to pretend that it isn't an arm. But we have to pretend because we cannot scientifically make that distinction. Because for a hand to be scientifically distinct from a head, a body, a planet, and a universe, you would have to show scientifically that the hand could exist without a universe. And you can't. You'd have to show that the hand could exist without a body. And you can't. You'd have to show that the hand could exist without the creator of a hand, and you can't. You'd have to show that the hand could exist without gravity, but you can't. This hand cannot be separated from a single thing, a single pattern of energy in all that is. A scientist will make the connection on multiple dimensions between the hand and every other thing in existence. It's only in language, it's only in the mind that we pretend that because we've drawn these nice little grids here, it's just made up. But because we made all that up, we pretend that every box is unique, but even the grid doesn't make sense. Grid A6 on a chessboard makes no sense unless all the other A, B, C, D, and 1, 2, 3 and exist, which makes no sense without the number system, which makes no sense without the game rules of chess, which makes no sense about the past. If there's no past, nobody invented the game of chess, so it doesn't exist now. Everything collapses when you try and separate it from any other thing in existence. And so we have entered the system. We've entered the system of language, which is the system of thought, which gives us a possibility field that, with the overlay of gradation, is infinite. We have an infinite possibility field. Now, probability fields are always smaller than possibility fields. So we have an infinite possibility field, and we have a smaller probability field. And then actual fields, what we call reality, the densest pattern of energy, are the smallest of all of them. So you have possibility, very big, probable, many, many, many times smaller than actual, just a tiny little dot. Now we can see this in a moment, right? So here I am talking to you in front of this camera. Very, 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 very small. A couple of feet wide, 9 inches deep, this high, very tiny, very tiny. Now, in order to be here, I can't be in the bedroom. I can't be with my dog. I'm in a very specific space-time. I'm here. Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, Marin County, California, evening, in this room, the filming room of my house, on my street. It's a very, very, very tiny, tiny place. In order to be here, I can't be outside. I can't be walking in the neighboring field. So it's very, very tiny. Now, my probability field are all the reasonable places that I might be. A probability field is much bigger. I could be in Thailand right now. I could be here. I could be here. I could be here. It's not probable, though, that I would be on Mars on this date, given that it's possible to be on Mars. It's just we haven't come anywhere close to that. So here we are. I'm here, and I'm thousands and thousands of times smaller than my probability field. I could be here in Thailand. I could be there in Thailand. I could be there in Canada. I could be. So let's say that my actual field is less than 1% of 1% of my probability field. And then let's say that my probability field is less than 1% of 1% of my possibility field. Well, my possibility field is limited to human thought, what's possible for me. Now, I can imagine infinite shades of brown, infinite shades of gold, infinite shades of red. I can't imagine me fussing over whether it's 288 million, the 288th shade of red or the 299th million shades of red. Such fine distinctions just don't matter. To what? To the ultimate reference point, sustainable human well-being. And so we develop language at a minuteness or at a density that correlates with the impact of that pattern of energy on sustainable well-being. The reason we're so fastidious about the details of the nucleus and the proton of an atom in a nuclear power plant is that if you get those wrong, a city blows up and you have massive amounts of suffering. So you have tremendous magnification and language distinction injected. You have a tremendous injection of consciousness through language and minuteness into that arena of human life because very small things affect lots of people in major ways. There are few things that are more major than determining what does and doesn't kill people with horrible deaths. Nuclear radiation for hundreds of thousands of people is a horrible thing for lots of people. And so we zoom into that with great attention to detail. Now, the 299th millionth shade of red for a sweater, nobody even notices it. I mean, they'll notice, is it a red sweater, a bright red sweater, a not red sweater, or a blue sweater? They'll notice that. And it might have some meaning in different contexts. But if it doesn't have any meaning, nobody notices it. And nobody takes the time to put it into language. So we cut the world into distinct patterns with words based on whether or not it's of interest to us, which is determined by how much it affects our well-being and the well-being of others. Now, as a little aside, this level of abstraction has very little to do with the well-being in terms of daily life of almost anyone. Meaning, me talking about this does not greatly affect the well-being in sensory terms of almost anyone. And so it's not going to capture attention and become meaningful to very many people. Because the question is, why should I be doing this? Why should I be thinking about this or this or this unless my sustainable well-being goes up? Now, there are subsets. There are people who enjoy the architecture of thought, the architecture of language, the search for meaning, and find that search very pleasurable. And so this could be incredibly meaningful and get, a lot of attention with that particular subset of people if they are able to locate it. If they are able to locate it. So we have technology. We have a system of locating thought on this planet. It's called the internet. It's called books. However, we also have a system where the majority of people on the planet correlate money with meaning because they correlate money with well-being. Now, it may be false, but a majority of the people on the planet today have correlated money and well-being. Now, that has a big impact. It means that anything that makes money for somebody or some group becomes incredibly important to a lot of people, directly and indirectly. Well, that fuels advertising. And so to locate information that doesn't make anyone any money is actually quite difficult. To locate information that has nothing to do with anyone making any money. For example, Google and YouTube make money by advertising. But they only make money if the audience watches the video. And so if they if YouTube promotes a video that lots of people will watch, it doesn't have to have any philosophical significance. If lots of people will watch cat whiskers, and YouTube promotes a video about cat whiskers, then they'll get lots of ad revenue. And if all the people working at Google are working at Google so they can make as much money as possible, correlating that with well-being, well then, there's a lot of drive to collaborate around those things that make the most money for the most people in the easiest ways. So then, how can you find information that doesn't make anyone any money in a structure that is organized around making the most money for the most people, that is the regulator of information? And hence you have the conundrum of some of the most, quote, important thoughts never making their way into the trending YouTube videos, and some of the least important thoughts that produce adrenaline or dopamine, etc., as quick hits but do not lead to substance. They make it because also the more pain a population is, the more of a quick fix they're interested. The shorter the time horizon for the sustainable well-being. Because if you have a group that is in no pain whatsoever, that's got a very high quality of daily experience, they might naturally look out a week to 1,000 years. And they might find it fascinating to think, what could we do today that would set the next 1,000 years of human history up? That's very interesting. But if you've got someone in excruciating amount of pain, they're saying, what can I do in the next 10 seconds that will give me a dopamine relief, that I'll be in a little bit less pain after laughing for 10 seconds at a shoe falling on a cat? And then suddenly, serving the marketplace, serving the population, dictates funny cat videos being the best way to produce the necessary supply of dopamine and adrenaline, etc., for the next moment, right? And so we're all in the business. That's what business is designed to do, to provide more well-being. Everyone is in the business, if they're in business at all, of making people feel better. The defense business is you'll feel better if your son has been killed, knowing that we blew up one of their children. That's the transference of pain via revenge. You're going to feel a little bit better. You'll feel better if your son doesn't get killed because they're frightened of killing him, because we've got a tactical nuclear missile and they know we're going to send it off if they kill your son. So, it's not going to make you feel very good to buy this nuclear missile, but it'll be so much better than how bad you will feel if your son dies because we don't have it. And so, okay, that's why we have nuclear missiles. If we do very big government and this and that, the other, there can be lots of corruption and background deals, and you'll get better kickbacks than if there's small regional government with complete transparency. It's much harder for corruption to go on when everyone knows everyone involved at a very small town level. It's harder than how did it come to be that a tube of toothpaste cost $1,000 by the time nobody knows, right? We can't all go off to Washington or whatever it is and figure these things out. And so, but big government allows for these mysteries that nobody has the time to figure out. And so there can be huge kickbacks. You'll get $100 for every tube of toothpaste. And if you're in it on me, you'll get $100 too, and you'll get $100. And suddenly, this is wonderful. Every tube of toothpaste sold, I get $100, you'll get $100, you'll get $100. And we don't know any of the ones paying for it. It's free money, right? It's wonderful. And then money is, of course, correlated to well-being, and so here we have that. Now, the system of human consciousness is vast because the system of language, if we took 60,000 words in the vocabulary, and let's say that the average person has a 7,000 or 5,000 word vocabulary, 5,000 times 5,000, now we have 25,000 possibilities if we just had 2-word sentences. Because we got all these 3 or 4 word sentences. But by the time we've got paragraphs and books, we've now got an infinite number of ideas that can be expressed in infinite number of ways for an infinite number of durations with an infinite amount of intensity through that simple thing of 5,000 word vocabulary. But the systems that we operate within on a day-to-day basis tend to be smaller. And what reality is a possibility field, a probability field, and an actuality field. That is the juncture of many, 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 many systems coming into confluence together. So back to the hand. This is a system of gravity. It is a system of color. It is a system of heat. It is a system of blood movement. It is an atomic system. It is a subatomic system. It is a molecular system. It is a system of skin. It is a system of bones. Meaning, however many words we can accurately use to describe something, in this case the hand, that's how many systems are in effect that relate to this thing. Now, we're talking about this, but one of the most important things is the system of attention span, the system of fatigue. I'm starting to feel tired right here. In the last 15 minutes or so, I'm starting to feel tired. And right here. So, and I'm aware, well beyond that, that the attention span, which is a system of attention refresh, is long past for a majority of people. So there's and every one of these cycles has to come into confluence, has to connect to show up as reality. If gravity stopped working as a system right now, the hand stops existing as it functions right now. The shoulders probably go up instantly if gravity stops existing. Maybe the whole house drifts off the planet if gravity stops functioning. There's so many different things that change with every single system. And they're all patterns of energy that are created and measured by human consciousness that interconnect and become visible to us through language. And what I think is most important is to understand the probability fields of every system that we're primarily engaged with. If we look at the education system, it has a probability field. These people are going to enjoy school, these people are going to be bored, and these people are going to hate school. It's called a probability field. Now, if our system is to send all of our children into this system for 10 years, it's a very significant probability field. Do you mean to say that only 20% of all of the people entering the system are going to enjoy it? But we're going into this system so that we can participate in another system called the workforce. And you mean to say the same thing is true of the workforce? That 20% of people love their jobs, 30% are bored, 50% or more hate them. Wow. You mean to say that we're asking a majority of people to go through a miserable experience in education to prepare them for a miserable experience at work? And that the system of marriage is very similar. Less than 20% love being married to their partner, another 30% bored, and 50% hate it, but don't know what else to do. This probability field in which 50% of the people do not enjoy and like what's going on is incredibly important because it ties into meaning. Meaning, if we can change the probability fields of these systems so that rather than 20% of people liking to go to school, 70% of people love going to school, we can change the system, because all systems are a refraction of the one. Let's look at this grid here. It's very arbitrary. This system could just as easily be on the diagonal. Works just as well. We just have to speak in language that organizes the reality this way. But the circle can be broken down into an infinite number of distinctions. Black and white, good and bad, beauty, truth, and goodness, bad, worse, and awful. You can break a system down into 4 distinctions. You can do 6 distinctions. They can be symmetrical or asymmetrical. Obviously, referencing geometry, you have more grace, more symmetry, less energy expenditure the more symmetrical a system is. This is one reason chauvinism is so problematic, is it starts off with the scientifically unverifiable assertion that men are better than women and that masculine energy is better than feminine energy, and that masculine traits and masculine roles are more important than feminine traits and feminine roles. And so you've got an unbalanced system. It's like a tire that, if your tire, if you drive a car and your tire looks like this, it runs pretty well as it's going around the round portion. But because it's so unbalanced, it gets stuck on these flat lines. Now, all human consciousness is predicated on language, has language as a foundation. All language is a system. All systems created with language are systems. And all systems have a number of distinctions. So what matters is how many distinctions. Is it black and white, or is it 2,000? Is it 2 or 2,000, right? There's a continuum of complexity, which is created by language and human consciousness, by observation through the lens of language. Then you have symmetrical or unsymmetrical. This is symmetrical. But if you create a system like this, where you divide the world into this and this, now you've got an unsymmetrical system. Unsymmetrical systems revolve, are less sustainable. If I give you $100 and you give me $1,000 and I give you $100 and you give me $1,000, you have an unsustainable system. It's out of scale by a factor of 9. You have a 900% gap between what I'm giving to you and what you're giving to me. And so eventually, and at a pretty rapid rate, if we repeat that, you're going to run out of money, and I'm going to have more and more. The system collapses when you run out of money. At the point when we tap again, and you have no more thousands to give me, and I can still give you 100 back, but we've got an unsustainable system. It doesn't work as well as a system where the system that will go on forever is you give me $100 and I give you $100. That can go on for 10 million years. There's no end to that exchange of energy. I make you feel good, you make me feel good. I make you feel good, you make me feel good. That can go on as long as the body can survive. So you have the complexity of the system, you have the symmetry of the system. Is it balanced, which correlates to sustainability? Is it a sustainable system? Is it an efficient system? Becomes the next thing, because you can have a system where the goal is to get to the bottom and we can just draw a line and go down here. That's one system. Or we can go like this, perfectly balanced, very complex, and goes like this. Takes more time, takes more energy for the energy to transfer. So is it an efficient system? Is it a complex system? Is it a balanced system? Is it an efficient system? And when we come into balance, we're not just looking at money, like you give me $100 of value, I give you $100. That's another system that goes on pretty well. But what about a thought? How about I give you a good idea and you give me a good idea? Like, what if this is a system? Like, if you get any value out of this and you don't give any value back, is that a sustainable system? Meaning, can you count on millions of people doing that for you if you don't give energy back? So I give you a good thought, you give me a good thought. I give you a good thought, you give me a good thought. That's a sustainable system, and then good thoughts go up. I give you a thought, you give me $1. Can I turn the dollar into a good thought so that there's symmetry? Or I still need a good thought, and I can't buy a good thought for $1. So I gave you a thought, you gave me $1. I want a good thought. I gave you a good feeling, you gave me a good feeling, you gave them a good feeling, they gave me a good feeling. You've got a good system there. If the system focuses on moving money 99% of the time and moving thoughts 0.5% of the time and moving feelings 0.5% of the time, then you've got a divergence, an imbalance between heart, mind, and body, which is part of the systems. Heart, mind, body, that's equal parts of the human experience. And so a system can be measured by its complexity, by its symmetry, by its balance, by its sustainability, by its efficiency. And a lot of those correlate together. The system can ultimately be measured by its probability field. For example, this triangle is going to have smooth sailing 99% of the time, a difficult point right here, good smooth sailing here, difficult point here. You ask water or a race car driver to drive this system, it's very easy, very hard right here. So when you have very simple systems, in order to balance out, you often have strong reversals. When you're dealing with extremism, for example, with a binary system, you usually go all the way to here and it gets way too terrible. And then you swing all the way to the other side and get way too terrible and extreme over here, and then back and forth. And you have to have hard pivots. Make more money, make more money, make more money. Now we got lots of money and we feel miserable and the family's falling apart. Okay, put the family first, right? Spend money, put the family first. Don't let it fall apart, right? So then you're going back and forth. The work-life balance, go over here and work, come home with your family, go home and, these are very simple binary systems that create tension. Now, the circle is the most complex and symmetrical system. There's no point that is worse than any other point in a circle. When you're driving a car, there's no point on the tire where you hit a huge bump. That's from a pothole that isn't symmetrical. The tire is a good system. And so you want to move towards complex systems that have fewer lines and where the angles are not as sharp. Rather than a work-life balance, a creating, resting, giving, receiving, enjoying, singing, embodying, thinking, reflecting, a much more complex system will transform, will transmute, will transport energy. Because back to the original sense of meaning in the original equation, all human beings ultimately want to feel sustainably better and want to avoid feeling chronically worse. And every system, from language to transportation to education to justice to consumerism to capitalism to chauvinism to liberalism, every system is a system for relating with the unknown, with that wordless energy, that vast field that we are all interconnected with. And the system that we use is superimposed onto the ecological complexity of all that is. In order to provide navigation, to provide guidance, to provide a map that tells us where we're going, because the world is, and you should feel good in the world, there's no clear direction about that. But the world is, and you're going to feel better when you do this, and then this, and then this, and then in order to do that, you have to do this and this. You start creating systems. And every system has a probability field. There's not a single system in the world today where you cannot measure the impact of the system. You have a police force. If you run a police force like this, a certain percentage are going to be convicted falsely. A certain number of the police are going to be corrupt. A certain number of the police are going to be afraid of turning in the corrupt police. A certain number of guilty people are going to get away. And it's going to take a certain amount of money. And a certain number of people are going to like the police force, and a certain number of people are not going to like the police force. And that's a probability field of a given police force. If you change the system, change the variable, each of those probabilities change. And so having descended into the domain of systems, you want to evolve a system from an inefficient system, a system that consumes large quantities of time, money, and natural resources and delivers very low levels of sustainable well-being, towards a more efficient, i.e. more intelligent system, a system that consumes less time, money, and natural resources and delivers more sustainable well-being for more people over time. That's the intelligent evolution of a system, referencing it to what means something, which is human beings feeling better or feeling worse. All systems have a probability field. And what really matters is measuring that probability field, engaging with it in conscious design, fiddling with the variables until the probability field improves. That's human evolution. That's the evolution of intelligence. That's meaningful work to transform a system from something that consumes vast amount of energy and delivers low levels of human well-being to a system that consumes very little energy, that maybe puts off more energy than it requires, a profitable system, and creates higher and higher levels of measurable well-being, and as measured in the probability field. And as long as you have 100 people, 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people, relatively speaking to the population you're trying to measure, you can change the variable and you can decide, would this system be better as a pentagon or a square? As a binary system, or geometrically speaking, a dodecahedron. The more it moves towards the circle, the more it moves towards grace. The more it moves towards efficiency, the more it moves towards complexity, the more it moves towards intelligence, the less friction there is. The evolution of human consciousness is ultimately the evolution from the uninterrupted ecological whole descending into the binary system of polarity and with it extremism, and then evolving it back towards the circle through pursuing symmetry, balance, sustainability, and complexity, until ultimately all of those dots and all of those lines in the systems merge together as one and appear as the sphere. The map of reality and reality start to look similar, start to become indistinguishable. Thank you.